A to Z Mysteries, Book Number 14, The Ninth Nugget, by Ron Roy. Chapter 9. The kids sat and thought about Thumbs as the thief. "I know you don't like Thumbs," Dink said to Josh, "but I can't believe he'd robbed the Wheats. Besides, he didn't know the combination, remember?" "Who says?" Josh asked. "If he worked here for years, he could have learned it without the Wheats knowing." Dink picked up some pebbles and tossed them into the path. "Maybe it was some stranger," he said, "like Ma suggested." "I keep thinking about them being tied up and gagged," Ruth Rosa said. "Whoever did it was taking a real chance. What if we all came back from riding in the middle of it all?" "There's another reason I think it was Thumbs," Josh said. "He knew we wouldn't be back for a while, and he knew Ma and Pa would be gone at least an hour. Have you guys noticed how he's always sneaking up behind people?" "Guys," Dink said after a moment, "I wonder why the robber used ropes on Fiona and Lulu, but he handcuffed Ed." "Ed told us," Ruth Rosa said. "He had the handcuffs out to practice some tricks. The robber saw the handcuffs and decided to use them." "Maybe," Dink said. "What, do you think Ed was the robber?" Josh asked, grinning. "I could just see him hobbling around, tying up people and cracking safes on crutches." "Unless he was faking," Ruth Rosa said. "Faking what?" Josh asked. Ruth Rosa turned and stared at Dink and Josh. "What if Ed didn't really hurt his ankle? What if he pretended so he could stay here to rob the safe?" "Ruth Rose, Ed was handcuffed and gagged," Josh commented. "He couldn't do that to himself, could he?" "Well, he is a magician, isn't he?" "Plus," Josh went on, "Fiona stayed with him, unless you think she and Ed are partners in crime." "Well, it's possible, isn't it?" Ruth Rose asked. "I guess it could be any of them," Dink said. "But how do we prove it?" "I still say it was Thumbs," Josh said after a minute. "He knows a lot about ropes, and I bet he wore gloves so no one would see his missing thumb." "Josh, a lot of people know how to tie knots," Dink said. "And anyone planning to rob a safe would wear gloves so he wouldn't leave fingerprints." "Officer Fallon would say, 'Find the proof,'" Ruth Rosa said. "So why don't we look in their cabins?" "For what?" Dink asked. "Clues," Ruth Rosa said. "Like the black clothing this guy was wearing." "And my gold," Josh said. "Whoever took the nugget might have hidden it in his room." "Wouldn't that be breaking and entering?" Dink asked. "Just entering," Ruth Rosa said. "All the doors are unlocked, so we wouldn't be breaking in." Just then the dinner bell clanged. Josh dropped his rope and stood up. "Let's go eat. My brain can't think when my stomach is empty." They hurried to the dining room. While the adults talked about the robbery, the kids ate, kept quiet, and listened. Dink looked around the table at the guests and staff. It seemed unbelievable that one of these people was probably guilty. How could that person sit here and pretend? "It can't be any of the Wheats or the Clydes," Dink reminded himself. "That leaves Ed, Fiona, Thumbs, and Lulu." Dink glanced at Ed, sitting on the other side of the table. His crutches were leaning against the wall. Ed was showing Fiona and Judd a trick using a piece of string. Fiona was wearing a black turtleneck shirt over black jeans. Dink could see the red rope marks on her wrists. Was she the thief in black? Lulu was bustling back and forth between the kitchen and dining room. Somehow, Dink couldn't picture her tying people up and cracking safes. But like Thumbs, she might have learned the combination. Dink looked down the table toward the seat Thumbs usually occupied. His chair was empty. Suddenly, Dink felt someone's foot kicking him under the table. It was Josh. When Dink glared at him, Josh nodded toward the empty chair. Josh held up his thumbs and wiggled his eyebrows. I know he's not here, Dink whispered. Cool it. What's going on? Ruth Rose said. Before Dink could answer, Josh asked Ma Wheat where Thumbs was. He promised to teach me a rope trick after supper. Why, I don't know, Josh, Ma said. Perhaps he's gone to town. Pa tapped his spoon against his water glass. It's been a bad day at the ranch, he said. Why don't we all stay here after supper and play some cards? Ed, you can show us more of your magician tricks. The adults at the table seemed to think Pa's idea was great. Josh pulled Dink and Ruth Rose aside. This is great, he whispered. We can check out the cabins while they're all here. But won't it seem weird if we just leave? Ruth Rose asked. Josh just winked, then walked off to talk to Ma Wheat. He came back a minute later. It's all set, he said. We're out of here. What did you tell her? Dink asked. Just a little lie, Josh said, heading for the door. Dink and Ruth Rose followed. What kind of lie? Ruth Rose asked on the front porch. Josh headed down the path toward the cabins. I told her we had a summer project we had to work on for school. Dink laughed. So what's the project? Josh glanced up at the sky. Studying the constellations, he said. But we don't know anything about stars, Ruth Rose said. I know that, Josh said. But it's our cover. If anyone spots us running around in the dark, they'll think we're just stargazing. Chapter 10. Which cabin should we do first? Josh asked. I'll do Ed's, Dink said. I'll take Fiona's, Ruth Rose said. Did you guys notice she was wearing black tonight? Yeah, and Ed was doing knot tricks, Dink said. Josh, why don't you check out Thumbs's cabin? It's out behind the barn, but be careful, he might be there. No problem, Josh said. I'll look for the truck and the station wagon. If one of them is gone, he's gone too. The kids separated and Dink crept up the steps of Ed's cabin. The wood creaked under his feet. Dink was nervous, even though he knew Ed was still in the main house. He pushed open the screen door and stepped inside. The small light over Ed's bed was on. Ed Getz wasn't very neat. Clothes were tossed around the room. A gym bag and duffel lay on the bed, half-packed. Dink quickly checked the dresser drawers. He found a book called Magic Made Easy and a few colored scarves. He also discovered a couple of pieces of rope, but they didn't look like the ones Fiona and Lulu had been tied with. In the bathroom, Dink saw a bottle of aspirin, shaving stuff, and a purple toothbrush. A black rubber tube hung from the towel rack. At first, Dink didn't recognize it. Then he realized it was a stethoscope. He probably uses it in a magic trick, thought Dink. Back in the main room, Dink checked the wall hooks. Shirts and pants were hanging there, but none of the clothing was black. Dink felt guilty about poking around in some other person's room, but he wasn't hurting anything and he wasn't stealing. He peeked inside the duffel and gym bags. Each held clothing and a few books. Dink wondered why Ed hadn't finished unpacking. Suddenly, Dink heard footsteps on the porch. He froze, then dove behind the bed. He lay there praying the screen door wouldn't open. Then Dink smiled. Of course, it was Josh or Ruth Rose walking on their own cabin porch. The cabins were only about 20 feet apart, and the windows were all open. Dink stood up and peeked out Ed's window. Josh and Ruth Rose were next door, waving through the window. Dink waved back, then hurried next door. Boy, you guys scared me, he said. What did you find? Josh asked him. Dink flopped on his bed. A book about magic and some stuff to do tricks, Dink said. No black clothing and no gold. Sorry, Josh. Fiona has a lot of black clothes, Ruth Rose said, and she has a ton of mystery books. Anything about safe cracking? Dink asked. Nope, but I did check out that chair she was tied in, Ruth Rose said. I don't see how she could have tied herself. She could have done her feet, but her hands were tied behind her back. She didn't tie herself, Josh said. It was Thumbs. By the way, the station wagon is gone. I sure hope he didn't drive to town to sell my gold. What's his cabin like? Dink asked. Filled with stuff, Josh said. My mother would love this guy. He's so neat. His bed was made and all his clothes were hung up. Josh, never mind how neat he is. Did you find any clues? Ruth Rose asked. Josh grinned. Yup. He owns black gloves, black jeans, and a black ski mask. A bunch of ropes, too. And check this out. He has a TV and VCR, and guess what movie he's watching? Dink and Ruth Rose just stared at him. Famous Robberies of the West, Josh said. I saw the box it came in. That doesn't prove he's the robber, Dink said. In fact, none of the stuff we saw proves anything. And we still don't know where my gold is, Josh said, coiling his lasso on his lap. I was almost rich. Just then the kids heard a scuffling noise out front. They looked through their screen door and saw Ed hobble past the cabin on his crutches. He moved slowly, holding his bandaged foot in the air. Once he made it up his front steps, he balanced on his good foot while he opened the door. Then he slipped inside. Josh, I know you're bummed out, Ruth Rose said. I don't blame you, but maybe the sheriff will find the robber. Josh shoved open the screen door and walked out onto the porch. He sat on the step with his lasso draped over one knee. By tomorrow, the guy will sell the gold, Josh muttered. He'll get a bunch of money and take off, and no one will ever catch him. Dink and Ruth Rose joined Josh on the porch. It was growing dark, and fireflies were beginning to flicker in the bushes. Sounds of laughter came from the main house. Dink sat next to Josh. Want to walk down to the pond? He suggested, trying to get Josh's mind off his lost gold. Josh just shrugged and continued staring into the night. Okay, let's go, Ruth Rose said, but let me get my bug spray. She turned to go back in the cabin, then stopped. From where she was standing, she could see right into Ed's side window. Guys, look, she said. What? Dink asked, looking up from where he was sitting. Dink and Josh joined Ruth Rose. They could see Ed Getz moving around the cabin carrying stuff. What's he doing? Dink asked. It looks like he's packing, Ruth Rose said. Like he's getting ready to leave. Chapter 11. Something's weird, Josh said. He tiptoed down off the porch and scooted over to the side of Ed's cabin. Dink and Ruth Rose followed him, and the three crouched under the window. They slowly raised their heads till they could see inside. The gym bag and duffel bag were zipped and standing next to the door. The crutches were lying on the floor. Ed was sitting on the bed, unwrapping his bandage. When the bandage was in a pile on the rug, Ed pulled off his sock. He tipped it upside down, and out tumbled Josh's Nugget. The rat, Josh whispered. Ed quickly jammed the Nugget into his pocket. Then he walked toward the door. He wasn't limping at all. He's leaving, Dink whispered. What should we do? I'll go ring the bell, Ruth Rose said. You guys stop him. Ruth Rose dashed toward the house. I've got an idea, Josh said, and ran behind Ed's cabin. The cabin light went off, and Dink heard the front door open. He ducked down as Ed stepped onto the porch with his gym bag. Ed looked around, then reached back through the doorway for the duffel bag. Carrying one bag in each hand, he stepped off the porch. Suddenly, the dinner bell began to clang. Ed Getz stopped in his tracks. At that moment, a rope loop fell over his shoulders. The rope tightened and stumbled, then fell to the ground with a thud. "Gotcha!" Josh yelled down from the cabin roof. He wrapped the other end of the rope around the chimney. "What's going on out here?" It was Pa and Judd running down the path. "I caught the crook!" Josh yelled from the roof. "My gold is in his pocket." The next morning, there was one empty seat at breakfast. Ed Getz had been taken to the Bozeman jailhouse, and Josh had his gold back. "That sprained ankle was faked," Judd said. "After he knew the gold was in the safe, he pretended to be hurt so he could stay back at the ranch. I have a feeling he stole money out of my wallet, too." "He must have gagged and handcuffed himself after he tied up Lulu and Fiona," Josh said. "I'll bet he used that stethoscope to listen to the safe's lock and figured out the combination," Dink said. "Seems that way," said Pa. He picked up a fax off the table. "This came in from the sheriff a while ago. Seems our Mr. Getz got himself into trouble in New York, too. He was a safe cracker and a pickpocket." "Hadn't it been for these 3 kids," Judd said, "he'd have been long gone. There's a train out of Bozeman at midnight." Thumbs looked down the long table at Josh. "You thought it was me, didn't you, Sonny?" Josh turned the color of the strawberries lying on top of his cereal. How did you know?" "I heard you 3 kids making your plans last night," Thumbs said. "I made myself scarce so you could search my cabin. Then I just sat and waited to see what you'd find." Just then they all heard a loud roar from the kitchen. Before anyone could stand up, a fur-covered shape came running into the dining room, growling. "What have you done with my baby bear?" it cried. "Lulu, you'll scare these kids half to death," Ma said. Lulu stuck her head out from under the cowhide and grinned. "Hope I didn't frighten you too much the other night," she said. "It was you," Dink said. "Yeah," she said, "but Thumbs put me up to it." Thumbs winked. "Couldn't resist," he said. Josh's huge Nugget sat next to his cereal bowl, gleaming against the white tablecloth. "That should bring in a tidy sum," Judd said, grinning at Josh. "I'll take you to town to sell it after breakfast." "No thanks," Josh said. "I've decided to leave the gold here. I want you to sell it and use the money to save the ranch." The table became so quiet all Dink could hear was his own heartbeat. "Josh, are you sure?" Judd asked. "What about your new car?" "Guess I'll just have to find another Nugget," Josh said. He looked at Thumbs. "I'll show you my method." Thumbs laughed. "I'm eager to learn, Sonny." "How can we ever repay you?" Ma asked Josh. Josh just blushed. "I know how," Ruth Rose said, giving Dink a little kick under the table. "Josh loves to be kissed." Ma stood up. "Well, that's easy," she said, heading down the table toward Josh. "Me too," Lulu said, puckering up her lips. She came at Josh from the other side of the table. Josh charged out of the dining room, screaming as if a bear were after him.